In this video, you'll learn everything you need to know about using virtual instruments inside Logic Pro X. Now, this is a pretty long tutorial, so don't feel like you need to watch it all now. I've also included some timestamps in the description so you can come back and reference different parts of it later. And before we dive in, I just want to share with you our free Logic Pro X cheat sheet. It's completely free, and inside you have my favorite keyboard shortcuts so you can save time while you're working. Also some information and tips for the different stock plugins that come with Logic, as well as some recommended starter settings. So it's just a really useful PDF to have if you're a Logic Pro X user. So either head to the link on screen now or the link in the bio to get access. Okay, let's do this. So it's important to know more about the software instruments and synthesizers available in Logic before you start learning about recording and working with MIDI. And if you're working with any electronic music or genre, this is going to be really important. Or if you're working with any genre of music where you want to include, say for example, even just one or two synthesizer parts, you need to be familiar with the software instruments that come with Logic and the synthesizers that come with Logic. So first of all, we're just going to go ahead and create a software instrument. Default patch is fine. In the future, you can set it here so that it goes straight to the right synth, and open library. Let's create. So a few things here. First of all, you can see the musical typing window has appeared. You can access this anytime with Command K, or by going to Window and hide musical typing, and then let's turn that back on. And what this allows us to do is to use our computer keyboard like a musical keyboard. So by pressing the corresponding keys here, you can play a music. And this is really handy if you're composing on the fly on your laptop and you just want to play a part in. It's also really handy if your USB keyboard isn't plugged in or isn't accessible and you just want to test out different sounds. Because what we can do now is, using the library, which is accessible here, we can go through and explore different sounds. So you can see there's loads of different categories, and within each category you have different sounds as well. So let's just try something a bit different. And then we can try a clav. And what you'll notice is this doesn't just change the instrument, which you can see here. It also adds EQ, it adds sends. So now if we go to our mixer by pressing X, or if we turn off musical keyboard, X, you'll see it's also created two new sends. One called small room, and that's a reverb, and another one called large hall. So this is actually a mixture of two different reverbs that are being sent. So just to recap from earlier, a bus will just send a duplicate of this channel, another version of this channel, to wherever you route it to. So bus 1 is going to, the input here is bus 1, so that's going through EQ, and then bus 2 is going to here. So let's turn those up and have a listen. If we just quickly record some MIDI, and we're going to talk more about this in another lesson. Excuse my poor playing, and now let's just loop that and listen to what happens when I adjust these sends. So you can hear that's a small room and this is a large room. And then the EQ here has already been set to a slight curve for us. Of course, you can play with that as much as you want, and the same with the clav. So you can play around with the sounds yourself. But the easiest way, if you just want to get to a sound, is to use this library and kind of find what you're looking for. So a lead synth, let's say festival lead, for example. And you can see this time we've even got a stereo delay, similar to buses. One's an ambience and one's a larger reverb. Let's have a look at them. So that's quite a short reverb, and that's a really long reverb. So there's so many sounds here, and I recommend that you pick a sound in the library and then you can edit it to kind of your preferences. So that sounds kind of horrible. But you get the idea. You can go through and now edit these plugins to change the sound. So to use a synthesizer to create your own sounds, or to use a more traditional synthesizer, we can turn off the library and we can create a new track. We could do it on this track, but let's make a new one. Another software instrument, and this time we're actually going to go to the synthesizer, and this will create an ES2 synth for us. So now we can open that synthesizer, and now we've got a more traditional synthesizer. And you could also do it by just changing it here. So if I decided instead I wanted to use a different one, I could just change the input like so. When you're working with sounds as well, you can click on the channel and then you can actually access the library for any one of these plugins. And this applies to audio channels as well. So if I want to pick a EQ preset, I simply hit that, and now this is going to give me a load of EQ presets in the library. Or I could click the arrow next to delay, and now we've got loads of delay presets. Or phaser, and now it gives me phaser presets. So the library is really handy if you want to just quickly navigate to something that works and then tweak from there. I recommend using presets because it can save you quite a lot of time. Over time you can create your own presets. So I can add my own here by going to save. And now I've got my own preset here. So you can create your own over time, but that can save you a lot of time and energy when you start using the same settings over and over again. It's worth creating presets. And if you're new to it all, start off with the presets to kind of get you into the right starting area and then tweak from there. Of course, you can also access presets at any time by going to the drop-down box within the plugin and choosing a preset there. So in the next few lessons, we're going to go over the most popular Logic synthesizers, which are the ES2, the EXS24 sampler. We're also going to talk about Sculpture and Ultrabeat, and just kind of a quick introduction to each of those. That's a whole course in itself to go into each of these in detail. So I'm just going to introduce each one and give you an overview of how to use them. So first of all, let's take a deeper look at the ES2 synthesizer. So let's delete this one and change this to ES2. And let's get up the musical keyboard as well. So this is your kind of stereotypical hybrid synthesizer, but it can be a bit overwhelming. There's a lot to control, and that's because with this you can create your own sounds from scratch. So you need to have control over every single parameter. But I recommend that for now you just use the presets, like with the virtual instruments, and then you can alter the presets more to your taste. So say for example, we know that we want a kind of synth lead, and let's just go fresh R&B. So let's go over each section in a bit more detail. And first of all, in this section here, we can see the kind of creation phase of this synthesizer. So we've got 3 different elements to the sound, and we can turn these on and off like so. So let's listen to these one by one. So that's kind of a softer element. That's similar because that's also based on a sine wave. And there we go, that's kind of a bit more aggressive. And then we can turn all of these on, but I recommend that you don't really play with these too much because that's going to really affect the sound of the synth. For example, if I change this and just change a few parameters, suddenly we've got a completely different sound. So let's go back to that. You can experiment with that a bit, but what we're going to look at in more detail, these sections over here. So here we've got 2 different filters that we can use, and we can also blend between the 2 with this control. So let's start with this one. So we've got a filter cut, and that controls the cutoff frequency. We can also control the resonance. And we can add drive. And we can also change what kind of filter this is. So at the moment it's a low pass filter, but we can change it to high pass. We can change it to peak. And band pass. So here as well, we can control the steepness of the filters. And we can blend over here. And then you can blend between the two. So play around with that a bit. You can turn it on and off as well with that control there. And then here we have the output section. So we can control the volume, we can control the tone, add distortion. We can also add phasing, flanging or chorus. So here's phase, flanger, and chorus. So here, by playing with these sections, we're maintaining the original sound, but we're just kind of playing with the parameters a bit, and we can tweak it a bit more to kind of suit our music. Speed dictates, of course, how quick the chorus, flanger or phaser are. Down here we've got our modulation section, and this is where it starts to get a bit more complicated. So we can, for example, modulate a cutoff frequency. So it would be the same as doing this manually. That's modulation. And we could either use the modulator on a USB keyboard, or we can make it automatic with LFO. And first of all, we decide a target. So let's say filter 1 cutoff 1, source LFO, and then we need to add. This dictates how much it's going to modulate it. So let's listen. So you can play around with that. Again, can't go into too much detail because this is a whole area of expertise in itself, is synthesization. But if you're familiar with how to use a synthesizer, that's how this one is laid out into its basic sections. If you're not familiar, I recommend you use the presets, and then you can play around with these two sections here to kind of tweak the sound a bit more to your liking. Now let's learn about the EXS24 sampler, and this is a really handy tool. It's really great, and I've got a multi-track loaded up here, something that you heard earlier, just so that we can actually start sampling some of this vocal and some of these drums. So let's just have a quick listen. Your eyes are getting colder. So let's say, for example, we were working on a kind of like EDM song, and we wanted to sample this vocal. And towards the chorus, we wanted to repeat and manipulate one of the lines. So let's find a good line. All night long, I'll be. So I'll be, that's kind of the name of the song. So that's a good bit to choose. So the first thing that we're going to do is go about this my favorite way. And that's to actually select the audio first and then load up the sampler. You can do it the other way, but that's only if you have audio files that are outside of the project, and I'm going to show you that in a second. But for now, if you want to sample something within a project, we're first of all just going to split this, and we're going to select this piece of audio here. We're going to go to track and convert regions to new sampler track. We're then going to leave it on regions, and then we're going to hit OK. And what you'll notice now is we've now got a new channel with the EXS sampler, which is shown here. And now if I play this, even though this is just a MIDI note, you can hear that it's actually playing the vocal. And that's because what the sampler has done is taken that audio, put it inside the sampler, and then we're just triggering it with a MIDI note. So this is a kind of similar layout to the synthesizer. We've got some kind of control options here to alter the original audio. We've then got a filter. We've got our output section, and down the bottom here, we've got the same kind of modulation section. If we go to edit, this is where we can actually play with the samples themselves. So now you can see this one square down here correlates to this lead vocals, which is what we just selected and sampled. So if I hit this note, you can hear that it's playing it. Now, all the other notes don't work. So what we need to do is extend the range of this. Now, there's two ways to do that. You can either drag it like this, or you can go to key range here and drag that, or actually enter it in. So let's just make that nice and big. And now what we can actually do, if we bring up the musical typing keyboard, is transpose this to different keys. If we move down to the bottom first. So you can hear it's taking that sample and it's transposing it into different notes. So the first thing we need to do is check that this is in tune. If we were going to actually use this in a song, it needs to be in tune. So let's go to audio effects plugins on this channel and add metering tuner. Now what we need to do is adjust this using the pitch controls, which you can see here, coarse and fine pitch, till it's in tune. So let's just choose a normal note. Let's go for E. So let's see how far out it is. So it's actually very flat because it thinks it's D sharp. So let's try adding it up one course. And now it's a bit too sharp. It's telling us here how many cents out it is. It's never perfect, but we just want to try and get it in. Let's try a different note. So it seems to be a bit sharp for most notes. So you can play with that a bit more, but that's looking roughly in to me. So you can hear at the moment it's just doing one note. If I hold a note down, it just plays it once. But what if we want to loop it? Well, we can do looping and lots more by right-clicking here and going to Open in Sample Editor. So what you can see here is the whole audio file. And this is actually the audio file itself. You can see here leadvox.wav. But what it's showing us with this highlighted part is the bit that we're actually sampling. So there's a few things we can do in here. First of all, be wary of the functions menu, because this is like the audio file editor, just in its own pop-up window. So what we're actually doing here is editing the audio file itself. So if you do any of these functions, it's going to be destructive and apply it to the audio file. So if you want to do that, make sure you make a copy like we did earlier by copying the region and then converting it to a new audio file. So what we're going to do instead is look at a few other options. We can adjust the region down here. And this is handy if we want to adjust the boundaries of the sample. So if we want the sample to start a bit closer to the word, we could move it there. And if we want it to cut off the end, we could move it to there. And now this is the sample that's going to be in the sampler. We can also do it by making a selection like so, and then go and edit and selection to region. And you can see what that's done now is made this longer. So let's bring that back again. So we mentioned looping. Well, if we want to loop this, we have to again make sure it's selected, and then we go to edit, selection to sample loop. And what this will do is add this little orange bar here, S loop, and that's going to be kind of the looping area. So let's make this a bit tighter, like so. And then what we need to do before we exit is write sample loop to audio file. And that'll actually leave a note in the audio file that this is where we want it to loop. So we can close that. Now, this won't have done it automatically. If I press a note, you can hear it's still not looping. What we need to do is go to zone, update selected zone info from audio file, and make sure you've got this selected. You can see here it says differences detected for one zone. First of all, we changed the start time. We also set the loop to on, and we changed the loop start. So let's hit change. And what we see here, if you can't see it, you just need to go to view, zone loop. Now we can see here we've got a loop section where it says loop on. Now if I hold down a key, you can hear it looping. So then we can adjust the parameters here as well. We can make it a shorter loop if we wanted to. We can right click on this and make the loop even smaller by dragging this orange bar like so, or we could just do it to one word even. can move this to the other word if we wanted to.
I'll be.
And you can hear it's actually only looping that section, but it's playing the whole thing the first time off. And we can actually make them different sizes, but the region always has to be larger than the loop. If the region is smaller, it won't work. So we can make the loop really small. Like so. So once you're happy with that sample, you can also add new zones by doing load multiple samples, and then it will give you a browser for you to open up WAVs and other audio files to import as samples, and then you can add them to your keyboard and play with them there. So once you're happy with this, you can close this and save it. And now we have our sampler. And now we can play around with some of these settings. So we can change the glide. We can tune it. And you can play around with those settings there. You can also add a filter. We've got to turn this on first. And same settings as last time. We can adjust the volume here and the level. And again, we can add modulation, so we can modulate the filter cutoff and use the LFO again. And let's listen to that if we add some incremental there. And as you can hear, it's easy to play around with samples and make them sound like synthesizers, or just leave them as samples to change the pitch. If you want to sample drums or something more rhythmic and take lots of samples rather than just one, you can use the transient kind of convert feature. So if we go back to something here, and let's pick a phrase of vocals. Or we could pick the bass, for example. Let's try that. So say we just wanted to take these. I can click on this, go back to track, convert regions to new sampler track, but this time go to transient markers. And what this is going to do is create a new sample for each note. So now when we go into this sampler and edit, you can see it's got 3 different notes. So you can see it's cut them perfectly. Of course, if it had it a bit off, you could just go into the sample editor, find where the sample is, and you could adjust the region slightly. But that had it spot on. And again, you could turn on loop and do whatever you want with that. We can then move these to different notes, so we could have 1 on each octave. So now we've got 3 different Cs. And even though they're not in the key of C, we can do that. And then we could stretch them like so. Now we've got a few options. So we can either transpose this original note into different keys. Or we can go up an octave. So it'll keep the pitch, but it'll just use a different sample. So you can move them around, or you could pitch shift them, or put them on their actual pitches. So if I knew what notes these were, I could allocate them to their respective notes, and then we'd just be playing it like a normal bass. And there we go, that's the sampler. Can't go into too much more detail than that. Very powerful, but that's the easiest way to use and kind of mold your samples, whether you're doing EDM or electronic music, or you just want to sample some drums perhaps to use in a breakdown or something else. Sculpture is better at modeling real-life vibration and interaction between objects of different timbre and material. So it's better for sound design for film and that kind of stuff, but it's also really good for recreating natural sounds that have an interesting electronic element to them. It's kind of hard to explain unless I show you, so let's go ahead and open Sculpture. Now here we've got all the presets, but I'm going to close the library and instead just open up the plugin here. So this is the main interface of Sculpture, and it might look familiar because again we've got the same layout as the ES2 and the XS sampler. So we've got our kind of like input here on the left, which is the source and controlling how the sound is made. We've then got a filter here in the middle, which does the same thing. We've then got our output section here, and we've got a delay, an EQ, and various other settings. And again, modulation down here if you want to use it. But once again, I recommend you just stick to these three sections. And with this, you can experiment a bit more. If you want to use the default guitars and stuff, that's fine. But you can experiment a bit more with this and you can get some really interesting sounds out of it. So first of all, let's just have a listen. So this is a plastic guitar. And the important thing to note with Sculpture is that you quite often have to experiment with different frequency ranges, because if I go to a bell, for example, at a low frequency, this is going to sound really strange. Whereas at a high frequency, because it's higher pitched and sped up, it actually sounds like a bell, and somewhere in the middle. So you can hear how much a difference frequency and pitch can make. So if you're browsing the presets and it sounds odd, make sure you check different octaves. Okay, let's stick to bells, and let's experiment with this in the middle, because this is a really cool feature. You can see on this XY pad we've got nylon, wood, glass and steel, and this dictates the timbre of the sound. So as we move around here, you'll hear that the bell goes from sounding like nylon to wood to glass to steel. So let's try that. And the way it's doing that is it's physically copying the way that those different materials resonate. And that's how it sounds woody or nylon-y or glassy or steely. If you want to turn this off at any point because it's hogging your CPU or making your computer run slow, you can just control click on this and do disable string animation. But I like it, I think it's pretty cool. So that's a really cool feature of this. You've got some controls around the outside that you can play around with. But here as well, we've got our objects. So for the bell, it's quite simple. We've only got one object. But as well as the object itself, we can control how it's excited. So because this replicates physical kind of sound, it needs something to start the sound. So in real life, to play guitar, you hit the string, or if it's a bell, you hit the bell. If it's a violin, you bow the string. So you need something like that. And you can see here we've got impulse, strike, pick, bow, noise, and blow. So we can try different things. So strike sounds like this. But we can also pick it. We can bow it. And obviously that sounds quite odd because we're bowing a bell. We can noise. And that's kind of does it without an impulse or an attack, and then blow. And with blow you can really hear that kind of airy sound at the beginning. So we've got some distortion there. So play around with that. You can use the filters as well, of course. You can turn this on. We can play around with the EQ. We can add a delay. So play around with those different sounds. Again, go to the presets and mess around with them. But you can get some really interesting sounds out of this. So you briefly saw Ultrabeat in an earlier lesson. When we converted an electronic drummer track into MIDI, it used Ultrabeat as the plugin instead of the acoustic drum kit simulator. And Ultrabeat is a beat synthesis. So this uses not samples, but everything is synthesized. And you can click on the different parts of the kit to see their individual sections. So down the left, we've got each part. Here we've got a step sequencer, which we're going to talk about more in a second. But this is the main window where we can control the sound itself. So again, I recommend that you use the presets until you get really comfortable with this. But you can adjust the sound slightly to your liking. So let's take this kick, for example. We can see here, this is how this kick is created. It's not a sample, it's all created through synthesis. So we can adjust a lot of different things. We can adjust the envelope and the decay of the note. Like so. And we also have a few preset envelopes. And you can change these here. So let's reset that to default. We can turn sections on and off, like so. And that will reveal the different parts of the sound. So up the top here, we've got kind of the clicky part. Here we've got a much higher beta kind of sound for the attack. Then here we've got a sine wave on the bottom. And when you combine all three, you get this sound. So let's increase the sustain a bit, make it sound a bit more natural, and then we can play with the attack, and it's easy to solo them. So you can see this is using envelope 3, so if we want, we can make that a bit tighter. And we can also play with the cutoff. And this is all just a filter like in the other ones. This is how they're combined. So this on the outside is each section on its own, so we can control the sounds. Now they're out of tune. We might want a subbier kick like that. And then we can control their volume. And like so. And then once they're combined, we can apply a filter here. And this is set to low pass, high pass, band pass, etc. And that controls the dB slope. And then finally here we've got a ring modulator. And our final volume here. And this is controlled by envelope 4, as you can see. So if I make that smaller, the whole sound of the kit goes smaller. So what we can now do is play with all the other sounds, the snare for example. Let's see what elements we have there. Nothing there. So that's kind of the attack of the stick hitting the snare, and then this is the snare rail itself. So again, we can Play with the cut-offs, add some dirt. Now we can also use the step sequencer to program around different beats. If we hit play here, first we'll turn it on, hit play. We can change the pattern. So we control this by clicking on an instrument and then adding it at different points. So we can see here the kick is on beat 1, beat 9, beat 11, beat 17, etc. So we can add in more kicks. Or we can get rid of them. Now we've only got snare 2. If you want to see all of your instruments and where they're hitting the beat, you just press full view down here, and now you can see what's hitting on what beat, and we can program in more. And this is good for just making like an 8-bar loop that you can then drag in. So let's check this first. And if you're happy with that, all you do is go to this little icon here. It says drag to arrange window. We click that and we drag it, we drop it here, and it adds it as MIDI. And now we can loop that and do whatever we want with it. So there we go, that's Ultrabeat.